Hi, my name is Joanne Cusack and I'm a doctoral researcher in gender and Irish history music at Maynooth University. My paper today is titled Reshaping Image and Performance, the Impact of Commercial Irish Dance Shows on Women Musicians. I'm delighted to answer any questions that may arise and thank you for listening in advance. This paper assesses the impact of Riverdance and more specifically Michael Flatley's shows on women musicians in Irish history music. Riverdance emerged as the interval act for the 1994 Eurovision Song Contest and was developed as a full-length stage show the following year. Michael Flatley was the lead male dancer in the original Riverdance, and following a dispute he left to produce his own show Lord of the Dance and subsequent productions. Producing highly commoditised cultural packages, Riverdance and Flatley's productions created a profitable model for promoters, agents and marketing gurus, one in which is still lucrative and referred to today. Bearing in mind the significant number of opportunities provided by these shows for both musicians and dancers, the implications for women performers and the roles available to them is noteworthy. Positioning the research in a post-feminine framework, the paper engages with the lived experiences of musicians who have performed in Irish dance shows and builds on the work of Leave's 2018 life cycle model and Judith Butler's theory of gender performance as an additional form of analysis. The research concludes by demonstrating how women musicians might benefit from performing with these shows, while at the same time be negatively impacted by the performance requirements and expectations pertaining to the commercial music industry. Although some studies have engaged with gender in Irish history music in the context of the community, there's been little work that engages with the representation and performance of gender in commercial contexts. Post-feminism and popular culture has been explored in the scholarly work of Angela McRobbie, Sheila Whiteley, Sue Jackson and Tina Ferris, to name a few. While many scholars view post-feminism as a groovier alternative to feminism, which is both ignorant and detrimental to core feminist beliefs, this research will adopt a more liberal approach, combining Braithwaite's 2002 understanding of post-feminism, while at the same time acknowledging McRobbie's double entanglement. Like Braithwaite, this research will view post-feminism as being not against feminism, but about feminism today. It signifies an active rethinking and shift in central categories and questions. Post can be read in relationship to its central term as a prefix that constitutes a link with. A secondary form of analysis will utilise Leave's 2018 life cycle model, in which she suggests that women in the popular music industry follow a particular life cycle. They are expected to look exceptionally gorgeous, and as they age are partially forced to exit the industry as they are deemed less attractive by contemporary music industry standards. Although this model focuses on the popular commercial music industry and may present certain hazards in labelling musicians, I propose Leave's model has relevance for an analysis of women in the commercial Irish digital music and dance industry. In contemplating gender, I consider Judith Butler's hypothesis, in which gender is an obsessive repetition of acts that constitutes identities. The fieldwork for this project comprised of ethnographic research in the form of a series of questionnaires and interviews with industry professionals. My analysis of this data is informed by the above feminist frameworks and research from contemporary music studies and reveals attitudes and experiences which existed or exist within the Irish digital music and dance scene. Capitalising on the popularity of the new subcategory of world music, Riverdance and Michael Flatley's dance shows reinforced the correlation between Irishness and Celticism through the use of Celtic imagery displayed in the dancers' costumes, stage props and wigs. Joan Bergen, costume designer for Riverdance, was inspired by, quote, Celtic mythology, choosing the colour green to depict the, quote, rolling hills of Ireland. Such costumes also display traits of what Myrnielov has described as the Celtic fairy. Considering this Celtic fairy perception further, along with the obvious Celtic connotations, the image is romanticised as one of beauty and innocence, or perhaps even purity. With this thought in mind, perhaps the Celtic music label placed women back within the confines of a stereotypical idealised image and role that is reflective of historical personifications of Ireland as feminine, whilst also encapsulating traits of romantic cultural nationalism, a significant characteristic of a post-colonial identity, white ethnicity, and even Szymanski's, quote, magic nationalism. This Celtic fairy image is visible in both Riverdance and Flatley's productions, such as the original 1994 Eurovision Interval Entertainment Act, where the appearance of lead female dancer Jean Butler exhibits features of this Celtic fairy image, and also Flatley's Celtic Dream scene from the Lord of the Dance production, where dancers wear long sleeve costumes moving their hands up and down, imitating wings. This Celtic fairy persona also resonates with the first phase of Leave's 2018 life cycle model, the good girl phase, which implies that the pop star must adhere to a set cultural templates of femininity. This good girl phase is also reflective of O'Shea's 2008 informant, fiddle player Anna's experience. Reminiscent of Butler's 1990 theory of gender performance, Anna believed that she must perform an acceptable feminine role in order to avoid sexual harassment whilst performing in her local session. Szymanski similarly indicates the perceived need to conform to gender roles in community contexts. However, not only are women expected to portray characteristics of the Celtic fairy, costumes are often provocative, emphasising the female form. Although there are some instances where this sexualised image can be seen in the various Riverdance productions, Flatley's shows place significant emphasis on sex appeal, with provocative costumes and performances visible throughout. Contrasting different approaches between productions, Riverdance fiddler Needley Cara recalled one experience in doing emergency cover for a copycat show, in which she was given specific choreography which involved kicking legs, bum wiggles and more. Quote, "It couldn't have been more removed from my work with Riverdance." End quote. Similarly, another musician who performed with Riverdance declined to work with Flatley's production due to the skimpy nature of the outfits. Commenting on the performance characteristic of Flatley's shows, Moira Egan, a fiddle player who performed in Riverdance and Michael Flatley's Lord of the Dance and Celtic Tiger productions, explained that as the costumes evolved and got shinier and glitzier, so did the dancing, so did the music, and so did the people playing the music. Yet in saying this, Egan maintained that an individual's comfort level was always taken into account. Another musician who performed frequently in Flatley's shows explained that she had limited choice in what she wore, and as subsequent shows became more sexualised, many of the dancers wore more provocative clothing. Clearly, this increased sexualisation of productions over time also mirrors contemporary fashion trends and popular culture. This more sexualised image of both dancers and musicians in Flatley's productions is reflective of Leave's Temptress phase of the life cycle, in which an artist transitions from being presented as a good girl to a temptress. In doing this, the artist wears more form-fitting, body-revealing clothing, begins an active seduction of her audience, and becomes more publicly accessible. Yet such temptress characteristics are not only visible in costume design, but also in performances, as several of Flatley's productions exhibit acts of eroticism. This is particularly evident in the breakout scene where Saoirse, seeking Flatley's attention, rubs her inner thigh in an upwards fashion, and the gypsy scene where Morrigan, the sexy temptress, slides her hands up her torso area. Such performance styles are indicative of a post-feminist sensibility, as seen in broader popular culture with bands like the Pussycat Dolls eliciting sexual acts through performance, thus further demonstrating the commercial nature of these shows. As Riverdance fiddle player Owen Neff states, quote, "Essentially what is being sold, as it were, from the perspective of this showbiz outside of the Irish context, has always exhibited female performers along these very sensual and flamboyant lines." End quote. Similarly, Mary McNamara, a concertina player who had a high profile prior to Riverdance, believes, quote, "You have to be an absolute model and then you have to be a very good dancer. But they pay the price for that, those girls. They work very hard, but yes, it has been sold on the model idea, on the beauty, on the fact that they're females, and I suppose there's sexual content in it. Females are being used here to sell. You're not going to get a place in that if you're anyway bumpy or lumpy. But I always concentrate on the dancing because they're just fantastic dancers." End quote. McNamara's and Neff's observations shed some light on the limiting and limited nature of these commercial performance spaces, as once again women are expected to look a particular way whilst performing in the commercial industry for the purpose of consumer consumption. Commenting on the dueling aspect of fiddle performances in Flatley's shows, Aisling Sage, a fiddle player with Flatley's recent productions, stated that perhaps there is more of an aesthetic appeal with two blonde girls in sparkly dresses playing fiddle at each other than two men. However, she'd never really put much thought into it. According to Egan, a fiddle player who toured with Michael Flatley's Lord of the Dance and Celtic Tiger productions, quote, "Certain roles were designed for certain people. There was the female singer and she was a goddess. Only a woman could play that role. Mind you, I know a few drag queens that could probably step into those shoes too. If there were two girl fiddlers, then that was the dynamic. Sometimes you can go to the show and you can see there are just some roles that are best suited to certain people. If you're a piper, you can't stand up and run around the stage and play energetically and flip your hair around the place." End quote. While Egan's response signifies that the instrument is a crucial factor in relation to these performances, she also illustrates how women musicians and dancers not only had to conform to an idealised image of beauty whilst wearing sexy clothing, but also had to perform roles that are gendered. Gender performances demonstrated in these shows amplify, quote, pre-existing societal gender norms through highly feminised performances of gender, and may look a bit more like grand actions performed in theatrical settings, end quote, Lieb 2018. These sometimes sexualised and gender performances, combined with sexualised costumes and beautified images, pertain to the commercial industry, and while they can be conceptualised as performance characteristics of Flatley shows, they also highlight the impact of the commercial industry on gender expectations, performance style, and freedom of choice. Many scholars have argued that with the increased commercialisation of Irish social music as a result of these dance shows, this also contributed to an increased sexualisation of the industry. With this in mind, Flatley shows can be, and are often, critiqued for the objectification of women performers for the purpose of consumption. However, McNair 2013 demonstrates how objectification can also be viewed as being completely natural and healthy. As he points out, quote, everything can be and often is objectified, merely by being perceived by another. This includes people, and contrary to the assumption that objectification is in and of itself a bad thing, there are many circumstances in which we want to be viewed, observed, and objectified. Not all the time, and not in circumstances of predation or perilousness, but in a variety of quite normal, healthy contexts. End quote. McNair's viewpoint certainly rings true, as many performers interviewed for this research described only positive experiences performing in Flatley shows. Sage explained the, quote, buzz and level of confidence she felt from running around playing the fiddle and in a really sparkly dress, and the lights are hitting off you. I love the drama. It is an amazing feeling when you are playing to such a massive stadium or a massive crowd, end quote. Similarly, Moira Egan recalls only positive experiences when performing with Michael Flatley's Lord of the Dance and Celtic Tiger productions. She reflects positively on wearing a, quote, teeny sparkly thing, end quote, and terms it as art or performance art, and explained how she had little confidence and no idea of moving on stage or experience of performing while standing up prior to performing in these productions. Quote, I've great respect for Michael Flatley and what he did for us all in Irish music and Irish dancing. For me, my experience in that show was only wonderful. It did great things for me. If you want to talk about femininity and comfort level, I was the biggest hippie and bohemian chick you ever met in your whole life. I never wore anything tight or figure-hugging or revealing because it wasn't who I was. It's funny, joining Lord of the Dance allowed me to develop a side of myself that I would never have looked into or felt comfortable in. In a way, because I had to do it, you had to step up. It did me a lot of good because it helped me in many areas of my life. End quote. Notwithstanding that attitudes concerning increased confidence as a result of performing in certain styles and clothes are reminiscent of a post-feminist sensibility, it must also be noted that Egan and Sage had only positive experiences whilst performing with these productions. While such performance characteristics may not be appealing for some performers, Egan and Sage chose to embrace the performance requirements of Flatley's productions, and as a result, Egan and Sage's confidence increased, which in turn positively influenced other areas of their lives. Clearly, the element of choice is of critical importance when analysing these shows, and feminist critique should not undermine a performance's own power, agency, and control. Although some scholars have argued that the freedom to express one's sexuality or ownership over one's body, a significant characteristic of a post-feminist sensibility, is a backlash against feminism by constituting that equality is already achieved, this is also too simplified an interpretation. Such repressive feminist boundaries are merely the stereotypical reverse of historical restrictions on women, such as pants or trousers not being deemed appropriate for women until the early 20th century. Instead of focusing on women's clothing, perhaps scholars should focus their attention on the power dynamics which elicit situations of harmful, toxic or destructive objectification. As Edwards 2018 correctly points out, clothes are not of themselves sexualised or even sexy, or only rarely, rather when wearing them we fear that the subject may become what they appear. Sexualization is all about our terrors of female sexuality, particularly when it is somehow let loose." End quote. With this thought in mind, sexualization in these shows may, quote, "no longer be presented as something done to women, but is something in which active, playful sexual subjects apparently freely choose to take part in." Gill, 2012. Therefore, while Flatley shows present requirements indicative of the wider commercial industry and gender performances are visible, his shows must also be acknowledged for their many positive influences on performers' lives. In concluding, this paper explores Irish dance productions from two perspectives, by demonstrating how women musicians might benefit from performing with these shows, while at the same time be negatively impacted by the performance requirements and expectations pertaining to the commercial music industry. The research also demonstrates that the dominant themes recorded throughout Leave's 2018 interviews are prominent within this field, thus reaffirming the impact of the commercial industry on performance styles and image in Irish digital music and dance. Similar to Leave's research, performers were expected to conform to constructed ideals of gendered beauty, and were often expected to pursue the role or occupation that was deemed, quote, "natural" for their perceived gender. The use of branding most associated with the Celtic music label further contributed to this by placing women back within the confines of a stereotypical, idealised and commercially constructed image and role. While such requirements highlight the impact of the commercial industry on gender expectations, performance style and freedom of choice, this research also challenges feminist critiques of these shows by presenting alternative arguments based on performers' own lived experiences of the scene. It is clear that respondents and interviewees have and will continue to express themselves in different ways, and have undoubtedly different views on their image, sexuality, and role or power. What one may feel as asserting themselves may be criticised by another for being submissive. Thus, this research concedes that feminism can be expressed in a multitude of ways, and neither way should be condemned by another. Like Braithwaite, this research does not necessarily argue for a, quote, "anything goes" feminism, nor for the possibility of observing all those crucial differences into one big tent feminist camp, but one that explores meanings of femininity that escape limiting repressive boundaries. Hence, with this approach, Flatley shows must also be acknowledged for their many positive influences on both musicians and dancers. It is clear that the development and commercial success of Irish dance shows created new opportunities for women performers at a professional level. These shows challenged and diversified the representation of gender, which may be understood in a broader context of changes in societal attitudes towards women, and this continues to evolve.